Finding my mother's forbidden diary uncovered a life she never shared, changing how I saw her struggles and inspiring me to accept our imperfect family history. I held it in my hands, a simple leather-bound book, cool and smooth against my skin, yet burning with an unspoken history. It wasn't just old paper and ink, it was a vault, a forbidden archive of a life I thought I knew, a life lived by the woman who was my mother. The truth, tucked away between its brittle pages, lay waiting to unravel everything I believed about her, about us, about the very foundations of our family. I remember the weight of it, not just physical, but an immense, crushing emotional burden that seemed to press down on me even before I dared to open it. It felt illicit, a trespass, yet utterly compelling. A small brass clasp, tarnished with age, held it shut, a silent sentinel guarding secrets I didn't even know existed. My mother, Sarah, was a woman of quiet fortitude, of routine, her emotions carefully guarded like precious, fragile antiques. She was the immovable object in our family's often chaotic world, a pillar of strength, her face rarely betraying anything beyond a polite smile or a flicker of concern. Growing up, I'd often wondered about the shadows that sometimes crossed her eyes, the brief, faraway look she'd get when she thought no one was watching. I attributed it to the general weariness of life, the unseen burdens all mothers carried. I never imagined those shadows held entire landscapes of grief, of profound sacrifice. This diary, tucked away in the forgotten corner of an old cedar chest, was a key, not just to her past, but to a deeper understanding of myself and the unspoken legacy of our bloodline. It was a secret she took with her, a silent confession waiting for discovery, a testament to a resilience forged in fire, hidden beneath layers of quiet expectation and the relentless march of time. And as my fingers traced the faded cover, a chill ran through me, a premonition that the world I knew was about to shatter and reform into something utterly unfamiliar, yet profoundly more real. The air in the attic, thick with dust and the scent of forgotten things, seemed to thicken even further, holding its breath with me. I was about to embark on a journey, not across continents, but into the uncharted territory of my own mother's soul. Our house, on Elm Street, was always neat, orderly, and somewhat quiet. It wasn't a sterile quiet, but one imbued with the hum of daily life, muffled by thick carpets and heavy drapes. My mother, Sarah, was the anchor, a woman whose hands were perpetually busy, tending to her rose garden, kneading dough for bread on Fridays, mending clothes with meticulous stitches. She moved with a purpose, her steps light, her presence calming. My father, David, was her jovial counterpart, a man who loved bad puns and boisterous laughter. He was a carpenter by trade, his hands calloused and strong, his heart equally so. They were, to my young eyes, the epitome of a stable, loving marriage, a bedrock against the world's uncertainties. I, their only child, Emily, grew up feeling safe, secure, if not always deeply understood by my mother. I loved her fiercely, of course, but there was always a sense of a boundary, an invisible veil between us. Our conversations were practical, revolving around school, chores, future plans. Emotional confessions, or heart-to-heart talks, the kind I saw my friends having with their mothers, were rare, almost non-existent. When I'd try to pry, to ask about her own childhood or her dreams, she'd offer a vague smile, a dismissive wave of her hand, and divert the topic with remarkable skill. "Oh, that's all water under the bridge, dear. What's important now is you." Her past felt like a locked room in our otherwise open-plan life, a room I instinctively knew not to try and enter. She had a particular way of looking at old photographs, a wistful, almost melancholic gaze that lingered on faces she never spoke about, especially those from before my father. It was a subtle thing, easily missed, but I, being a child of observation, stored these fleeting moments in the back of my mind. My childhood was filled with school plays, summer vacations to the lake, and Sunday dinners at Grandma and Grandpa's house. These gatherings were usually lively, full of chatter and the clatter of cutlery, but I often noticed how my mother would retreat slightly, often finding solace in the kitchen, meticulously cleaning up even when others were still lingering at the table. It wasn't that she disliked company, it was more as if she found comfort in the quiet solitude of tasks. My father, bless his heart, never seemed to notice these nuances, or if he did, he never spoke of them. He adored my mother, his affection a steady, unwavering flame. He admired her strength, her dedication, her unwavering sense of duty. He often told me, "Your mother is a rock, Emily, a truly remarkable woman." And she was. But even rocks have fault lines, unseen fissures deep within their core. As I grew older, into adolescence and then young adulthood, the distance between us, my mother and I, felt less like a boundary and more like a chasm. I attributed it to the generational gap, to her reserved nature, perhaps even to some failing on my part. I wished for a closer bond, for shared secrets and vulnerabilities, but she remained an enigma, a beautiful, stoic statue of a woman. I remember one particular summer when I was 16, heartbroken over a teenage crush. I locked myself in my room, sobbing for hours. My mother came in, sat on the edge of my bed, and simply stroked my hair. She didn't offer platitudes or advice. She just sat there, her touch a silent comfort. When my tears finally subsided, she said, "Some hurts go deeper than others, Emily. You learn to live with them." Her eyes, usually so composed, held a depth of sorrow that startled me, a profound empathy that transcended my petty teenage drama. It was a rare glimpse behind the curtain, a moment that always stuck with me, hinting at a pain she understood far more intimately than I could ever comprehend. Looking back, these tiny instances were breadcrumbs, scattered clues leading to a story I was destined to uncover, a story that would redefine my understanding of her quiet strength and the hidden landscapes of her heart. The discovery of the diary wasn't a deliberate act of snooping, but rather a bittersweet consequence of life's relentless progression. My mother, Sarah, always so robust and self-sufficient, had suffered a series of strokes. They had left her frail, her once sharp mind clouded, her vibrant presence dimmed. The woman who had been the unwavering anchor of our family now drifted in and out of lucidity, her memories fragmented, her words often lost in a garble of forgotten syllables. It was a profound and agonizing shift for all of us, especially for my father, who watched his rock crumble with a quiet, heartbreaking sorrow. He insisted on caring for her at home, transforming our once orderly house into a haven of quiet caregiving. But as her condition worsened and the medical expenses mounted, the stark reality of our financial situation became undeniable. We needed to sell the house. This was the catalyst, the unavoidable collision of past and present. The task of sorting through decades of accumulated life fell primarily to me. My father, understandably, was consumed with caring for my mother. So, amidst the dust motes dancing in sunbeams and the ghosts of Christmases past, I began the arduous process of dismantling a lifetime. The attic, that repository of forgotten dreams and discarded realities, was the hardest. Every box held a memory, every trinket a story. It was here, in the oppressive heat of a late summer afternoon, that I found it. Tucked beneath a stack of faded lace doilies, in a trunk I'd never seen her open, a heavy, dark cedar chest, usually hidden beneath a tarpaulin, lay the small, leather-bound book. It wasn't ornate, just simple, with a worn, almost smooth texture from years of handling, and that small, tarnished brass clasp. A profound sense of unease settled over me. This was private. This felt forbidden. My mother had always been fiercely private, her inner world a fortress. Yet the sheer presence of it, hidden so carefully, stirred a potent, almost irresistible curiosity within me. Was it wrong to look? Was it a betrayal of her trust, even now when she could no longer protect her own secrets? The ethical dilemma gnawed at me, but the desire to understand, to finally pierce the veil of her lifelong reserve, was stronger. I told myself it was for her, for me, to know the woman who shaped me. With trembling fingers, I worked the brass clasp open. It gave with a soft click that echoed loudly in the quiet attic. The scent of old paper, faint and sweet, wafted up. The first few pages were hesitant, dated from her late teens. They spoke of school friends, summer dances, the usual youthful anxieties. But then the tone shifted. The handwriting, initially neat and careful, grew bolder, more passionate, then sometimes frantic, almost illegible with emotion. She wrote of a boy named Daniel, a different kind of love than I could ever have imagined my mother having experienced. It was vivid, raw, an explosion of feeling that painted a picture of a Sarah so unlike the stoic woman I knew. There were descriptions of stolen glances, whispered conversations under moonlit trees, a secret world blossoming away from the watchful eyes of her strict parents. I felt a surge of exhilarating guilt, a thrill of discovery mixed with the cold dread of intrusion. The entries became a torrent of emotion, detailing dates, conversations, the overwhelming intensity of first love. "Daniel sees me, truly sees me," she wrote in one entry, her words almost leaping off the page. "He understands the wildness in my heart that no one else ever could." The wildness? My mother? The words felt alien, revolutionary. This wasn't the Sarah who baked apple pies and meticulously folded laundry. This was a young woman consumed by a love so powerful it seemed to vibrate through the decades. My rising conflict wasn't just about reading the diary, but about the dawning realization that the person I thought I knew, the simple, reserved woman who was my mother, had harbored an entirely different universe within her, a universe teeming with a vibrancy and passion I had never been privy to. The implications were immense, overwhelming. Each sentence I devoured peeled back a layer of the carefully constructed facade, revealing fragments of a past I could not reconcile with my present. The emotional tension tightened in my chest, a knot of anticipation and fear. What more lay hidden? What profound truth was this diary preparing me for? I felt like an archaeologist unearthing a forbidden tomb, both terrified and mesmerized by what treasures and horrors might await within. The sun dipped lower, casting long, distorted shadows across the dusty floor, and I continued to read, utterly transfixed, propelled forward by an insatiable hunger to understand the woman, the mother whose secret heart was finally laid bare before me. The entries grew darker, more frantic, the youthful idealism gradually giving way to a chilling sense of dread. The pages turned from tales of stolen kisses to whispers of fear, then to desperate pleas. The date was June 1972, and my mother's handwriting, usually so elegant, was a furious scrawl across the page, stained with what looked like dried tears. "I told him," she wrote. "I had to. He held me and said it would be all right, but his eyes were filled with such fear." I remember the air in the attic growing cold, even though it was a sweltering summer evening. My heart hammered against my ribs, a drumbeat of pure terror. The next entry, just days later, was fragmented, almost incoherent. "They know. Mama, her face. Papa's rage. Daniel gone. Where is he?" Then a gap. Days, weeks, maybe even months. The silence of those blank pages was deafening, a screaming void of untold suffering. When the entries resumed, the tone was stark, stripped of all youthful hope, infused with a raw, visceral pain that reached across the decades and seized my own heart in its cruel grip. August 14th, 1972. It's a girl, my beautiful girl. They wouldn't even let me hold her, not properly. Just a moment, her tiny fingers wrapped around mine, the most perfect, innocent creature. And now, gone, taken. My arms ache. My heart is a gaping wound. Mama says it's for the best, for the family's honor. Papa says Daniel was never good enough, that this is the price of my foolishness. But what price for her? My baby? Where is she? I feel her gone. I feel her absence in every cell of my body. A part of me died today. My world tilted. The words blurred, then sharpened, then blurred again through a sudden blinding rush of tears. A baby. My mother had had a baby before me, a daughter. I gasped, a choked, guttural sound that seemed to tear from my very soul. The stoic, reserved woman I knew, the practical, unyielding pillar of my childhood, had once been a heartbroken girl forced to surrender her child, her first love. The image of her, my mother, holding a newborn for a fleeting moment before it was ripped from her arms, was a hammer blow to my understanding of her, of everything. I could feel the phantom ache in her arms, the gaping wound in her heart, echoing in my own. The betrayal wasn't by her, but to her, by her parents, my grandparents, the very people I had remembered as kind, if a little rigid. They had orchestrated this, to save face, to protect their social standing. They had crushed their daughter's spirit, stolen her child, and forced her into a life she hadn't chosen. The subsequent entries confirmed my father's role, a man presented to her as a suitable, a good provider. She wrote of his kindness, his steady nature, how she tried to love him, tried to forget Daniel and their daughter. David is good, she wrote. He tries. I try too. But a part of me remains frozen, trapped in that hospital room, reaching for the empty air where my child should be. My father, whom I had always seen as the loving, if somewhat oblivious husband, was now cast in a new, tragic light. He was the good man who married a broken woman, never knowing the full depth of her wounds, or perhaps choosing to accept a partial truth in the name of love and stability. The overwhelming emotional impact hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just a secret, it was a profound, life-altering tragedy. My mother wasn't just reserved, she was traumatized. Her quietness wasn't a personality trait, it was the residue of a scream suppressed, a grief too immense to ever fully articulate. Her distant gaze wasn't just melancholy, it was a constant, unspoken search for a lost child. Every memory I had of her, every interaction, every unspoken moment was now recontextualized, viewed through the shattering lens of this devastating revelation. I saw the strength I'd always admired, not as an innate quality, but as a fierce, desperate resilience born of unimaginable loss. I saw her sacrifices, not as duties, but a lifelong penance for a mistake that wasn't hers alone. The shift within me was seismic. The daughter who had sometimes felt frustrated by her mother's emotional walls was gone, replaced by a woman consumed by overwhelming empathy, profound sorrow, and a simmering rage at the injustices of a bygone era. My mother wasn't just Sarah, my mom. She was a survivor, a silent warrior, a woman whose entire adult life had been built upon the bedrock of a broken heart. And in that moment, clutching the diary, surrounded by the dust and shadows of the attic, I understood her, truly understood her for the very first time. And that understanding broke me. And then, in time, it would begin to heal me. The immediate aftermath of reading those final, agonizing entries was a bewildering swirl of emotions that left me utterly disoriented. I walked around in a fog for weeks, seeing ghosts of a past I never knew in every corner of our home. The familiar scent of my mother's lavender sachets, the worn armchair where she always sat, even the way the sunlight fell through the kitchen window. Everything was now filtered through the lens of Daniel and the baby she lost. My own history felt like a flimsy overlay on a much deeper, more tragic narrative. The woman who was physically present, a fragile shadow of her former self in her bed, felt miles away, unreachable in her silent suffering. How could I confront her with this? How could I possibly bring up a wound so old, so profound, when she was no longer capable of coherent conversation, let alone explanation or comfort? The thought alone felt cruel, an unimaginable burden to place on her already failing mind. I felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. This knowledge, this raw, bleeding truth was mine alone to bear. I couldn't speak to my father about it. He already carried such a heavy weight with my mother's illness. To tell him that his devoted wife had harbored such a deep secret, such a profound, unrequited grief for a past love and a lost child, would shatter him. It would undermine the very foundation of their 40-year marriage, a marriage he believed was built on mutual devotion. And what if he did know, in some partial, obscured way? What if he had always known there was a sadness in her, a part of her he couldn't reach, and simply accepted it as part of her mystique? The thought was almost unbearable. My perception of him also shifted. Was his unwavering cheerfulness a coping mechanism, a way to lighten the unspoken burdens of their life together? Or was he simply oblivious, a good man who married a woman he loved without ever truly understanding the depths of her soul? I felt a resentment simmer, not towards him, but towards the forces that had created this elaborate web of silence and sacrifice. The secrets had not just affected my mother, they had permeated every layer of our family, shaping our dynamics in ways none of us had ever consciously recognized. The quietness of our home, my mother's occasional melancholy, my own sometimes strained relationship with her, it all made a terrible, painful sense now. I found myself obsessively rereading sections of the diary, searching for more clues, for any hint of resolution. I tried to imagine her, a young girl, heartbroken and alone, making such an impossible choice. The societal pressures of the 1970s, the stigma of an unwed mother, the crushing weight of family honor, it painted a stark picture of a different time, a time where individual happiness was often sacrificed at the altar of reputation. My anger wasn't just for my grandparents, but for the unforgiving judgment of an entire era that had forced countless women into such agonizing decisions. The pain I felt was a strange, vicarious grief. It was her pain, echoing in my own heart. I cried for the baby that was lost, for the love that was forbidden, for the vibrant young woman my mother once was, before life carved away pieces of her soul. I mourned the relationship I might have had with her, had those walls not been built so high, had that chasm not been so deep. I found myself walking through old cemeteries, driven by a morbid curiosity looking for grave markers with familiar surnames, wondering if somewhere, perhaps, her lost daughter had lived a full life, unaware of the mother who had silently grieved for her for decades. It was a futile search, a desperate attempt to grasp at threads of a past that was irrevocably severed. I started to notice how often my mother, even in her diminished state, would absent-mindedly reach for something that wasn't there, a phantom touch, a yearning in her vacant gaze. Was she, even now, searching for the child she had never truly held? This raw, profound empathy became my constant companion. It stripped away all my preconceived notions, all my petty grievances against her past emotional distance.
There was no room for judgment, only for a profound, aching understanding. The fallout of the diary wasn't a dramatic explosion, but a quiet, internal implosion. It shattered my perception of my family, redefined my mother, and forced me to reckon with the complex, often heartbreaking truths that lie beneath the surface of even the most outwardly serene lives. It was a journey into grief, yes, but also into a deeper, more complicated love for a woman I was only just beginning to truly know.
The resolution wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a neatly tied bow. It was a gradual internal shift, a slow annealing of my own spirit in the fires of understanding. My mother, Sarah, passed away peacefully 6 months after I discovered her diary. Her last days were spent in a serene quietness, a gentle fading, and I was there, holding her hand, whispering words of love and gratitude, knowing a truth that would forever bind us in a way I could never have imagined. In those final moments, looking into her eyes, which, even clouded, seemed to hold a flicker of deep wisdom, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I never spoke to her about the diary, not directly. It would have been unfair, cruel, given her fragile state. But in the weeks leading up to her passing, I found myself sitting by her bedside, holding her hand, sometimes reading aloud from poetry books she loved, sometimes just stroking her hair. And in those quiet moments, I spoke to her, not of the diary, but of love, of strength, of the deep well of resilience I now knew she possessed. I talked about how much she meant to me, how she had always been my anchor, and how, even through her silence, she had taught me more than words ever could. I believe, in some profound spiritual way, she understood. I saw it in the gentle squeeze of her hand, the faint, almost imperceptible smile that touched her lips. My father, though heartbroken, found a quiet strength in her passing. He spoke of her unwavering spirit, her dedication, her steadfast love. And as he reminisced, I listened, a new depth of understanding coloring his words. I saw not just the love he felt for her, but the profound respect he held for the mysterious, unspoken strength she carried. I recognized his acceptance of her unspoken sadness, a testament to a love that didn't demand every secret, but simply cherished the person. After her funeral, during the quiet days of mourning, I gently raised the topic with my Aunt Helen, my mother's older sister. I spoke vaguely about some old letters I'd found, hinting at a difficult time in my mother's youth. Helen, now in her late 70s, visibly stiffened, her gaze growing distant, her hands trembling slightly. "Times were different back then, Emily," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Families, they did what they thought was right to protect their own, to avoid scandal." She didn't offer details, didn't confirm the diary's grim truth, but her eyes held a sorrowful knowing, a shared burden of a family secret that had quietly shadowed their lives. In her silence, I found my confirmation and a measure of release. The diary didn't just reveal my mother's past, it unveiled a part of myself I hadn't known was missing. It taught me that love isn't just in the visible acts, but in the silent sacrifices, the unspoken burdens carried through a lifetime. It showed me the profound cruelty of societal expectations and the strength required to endure them. My perception of my family history transformed from a simple, straightforward narrative into a rich tapestry woven with threads of love, loss, betrayal, and immense resilience. It wasn't perfect, far from it. It was messy, heartbreaking, and deeply human. And in its imperfection, I found a profound beauty. This journey forced me to confront my own judgments, my own assumptions about the people closest to me. It taught me the invaluable lesson of empathy, to look beyond the surface, to consider the unseen struggles, the silent battles fought within the hearts of others. It made me realize that everyone carries a hidden story, a personal history that shapes their present, and that kindness, true kindness, comes from recognizing and respecting those untold narratives.